Now by Florence Villemino for
Hi,
a look
Molly.
at what's making headlines in the French press. And we're going to start with French papers continuing to focus on the crisis in Syria and a possible Western military operation.
Absolutely. Le Figaro says the West is playing for time while they wait for these UN inspectors to return from Syria. And Le Figaro points out that, they're facing increasing pressure, these Western leaders, and so they're starting to insist more on a political solution, so a definite change in tone, according to Le Figaro, and this casts a doubt over their determination to launch any kind of military operation against Bashar al-Assad. And Le Figaro wonders why Western leaders are backpedaling here, why earlier this week they were beating the war drum, so why are they changing their tone now? Well, Le Figaro says this has to do a lot with recent history, and you can see a photo there of Colin Powell in 2003. Unlike in the lead up to the Iraq war in 2003, Western leaders want to let the UN inspectors do their job all the way to the end, basically to show that they've learned their lessons from the past.
Well, it looks like the Figaro is also focusing on prudence here in France, isn't it?
Absolutely. Le Figaro says, François Hollande, the president, a lot of his aides had hoped that the Syrian crisis might be like the crisis in Mali, where it gave the president some clout, some prestige, showed that he had a lot of authority. But Le Figaro points out that Syria, is no Mali. First of all, France is not acting alone here. It has to coordinate. But also, public opinion here in France doesn't seem as determined that any kind of intervention in Syria would be a good idea. Le Figaro says, for some reason, French public opinion feels like there's a historic legitimacy in intervening in Africa, but that's definitely not the case in the Middle East, where things are a lot more thorny, and therefore there's not a national or political consensus.
All right, let's look now at Aujourd'hui en France, and it's focusing on relations between Russia and the U.S.
That's right. It says Moscow, Washington, a new face-off. So the two countries are obviously openly opposed to, what's going on in Syria. But Aujourd'hui en France points out that the timing of this tension is actually very particular, because it comes exactly 50 years after the Moscow-Washington hotline, the famous red telephone, was set up. So that red telephone, which actually wasn't a phone, it turns out, was established on August 30th, 1963. So in the middle of the Cold War, it allowed a direct communication between the Pentagon and the Kremlin. And the idea was basically to limit any kind of risk of war. But Aujourd'hui en France points out that, today tensions are very high between Moscow and Washington, not only because of the Syria question, but also because of the Snowden case that we've been reporting a lot about recently.
All right, well, another hot topic in the French press is the government's pension reform. That, of course, was put forward this week.
That's right. Libération takes a closer look. It's getting out its magnifying glass to see just who is going to pay. And, Libération is really upset today. They call this the big fat manipulation. Basically, during his presidential campaign, François Hollande had promised that he wouldn't touch small pensions. But according to Libération's calculations, because of this most recent reform, small pensions are actually going to be impacted, and this is going to have an impact on purchasing power for senior citizens. So Libération says the worst thing about this is that the government lied about it. And in fact, just this week when the Prime Minister, Jean-Marc Ayrault, was laying out the pension reform, he lied about it again, and he said that these small pensions wouldn't be hit. But so Libération says the government swore it crossed its heart, and then it lied and was sneaky about it. And in its editorial, Libération says hiding this aspect of the reform has really put into question the credibility of the government, and it calls on the government to be, transparent and honest.
And finally, next week, it is La Rentrée, of course, where French kids go back to school, but not all of them have had a restful vacation. This, of course, is according to Le Parisien.
That's right. Now, summer school is a thing. Some people go to summer school because they're nerds and feel like they just haven't learned enough during the year, but other kids have to go, at least here in France. Several high schools, for instance, are making certain students take summer classes at private tutoring schools to avoid failing a grade. So they have to come back to school this year with written proof that they worked hard all summer. Now, normally it's illegal to impose these kind of conditions to pass a grade. So all the schools that were interviewed in this article say this isn't their official policy. It's just a very strong suggestion. Good advice, as one school director put it, but in the end, it's just summer school.
Well, some people like summer school, not everybody. I know our producer does not like summer school at all. But Florence Villemino with a look at the French press. Thank you for that. And do stay with us. We will, of course, have more headlines coming up, and, of course, the British no vote to a Syrian intervention. Do stay tuned to France 24, please.